Welcome back. Namibia's export sector faces a significant challenge as the United States imposes a 21% tariff on key goods, including beef, fish, as well as minerals. Now, this move, part of a broader tariff policy targeting several African nations, threatens to disrupt Namibia's trade dynamics and reduce its competitiveness in the U.S. market. However, this could be a pivotal moment for Namibia and other African countries to strengthen intra-African trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area, fostering regional economic resilience, as well as reducing reliance on Western markets. We're now joined this evening via Zoom by Nina Shilongo, who's an international relations and economic diplomacy specialist, to unpack. Nina, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Nina, and thank you.
To start with, Nina, talk to us about what you believe are the most pressing short-term challenges that Namibia and possibly other African nations would face due to these tariff measures, particularly in terms of market access, pricing pressures, as well as supply chain disruptions.
No, Nina, in short term, one of the most pressing challenges that Namibia and maybe other African nations face is that our goods won't enjoy the sales that they previously enjoyed. And if the situation does not improve, and if we do not get an audience to negotiate, we will start feeling it in reduced income and unfortunately job losses in the industries, as you've mentioned, because if you cannot, for example, produce 100 tons, you do not need so many workers. And if you're not selling your 100 tons, you will not make your 100,000 to offset your costs. So for Namibia, our key export products risk becoming less competitive in the U.S. market as a result of this increased cost tariff. This could lead to a shrinking demand and diversion in terms of exports to alternative markets, which may not offer the same profit margins.
Considering this current environment that we find ourselves in with, some of the other African countries, how can us as African nations then maximize opportunities that are provided by the initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area that I mentioned, to boost regional trade and reduce dependency on these Western markets?
I keep saying there's an urgent need for Africa to reduce its trade dependencies, and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is one that offers a timely and powerful platform for this shift. It provides us a framework for African nations to be able to boost intra-continental trade, by removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers among African member states. So this is really good because it allows countries like Namibia to be able to redirect their product, such as beef and fish, to neighboring and regional markets, rather than relying solely on Western and sometimes Eastern partners whose policies can shift anything. So it allows really for real value chains to be strengthened. And this not only gives our economic benefit within Africa, but it also supports industrialization and job creation on the continent that we need to be serious about.
Nina, what would you say are the obstacles that are hindering intra-African trade at the moment?
Firstly, I would say inadequate infrastructure, which remains one of the biggest bottlenecks. Many African countries face challenges in road and railway connectivity. You have, for example, the port of Walvis Bay, which is a gateway for a lot of landlocked countries, especially here in Southern Africa. But you also have, at the same time, limited rail linkages and a lot of road congestion, which slows down the trade efficiencies. That's one, There's also the issue of custom inefficiencies and bureaucratic delays, which are a major barrier. So it's a cumbersome documentation to be carried out. There's a lot of lack in digital systems, and there's also weak interagency coordination at border that leads to a lot of these delays. These are just some of the challenges, and I think what we really need to be serious about is unlocking intra-African trade, and not because it's not just about reducing tariffs. It's also about reducing the friction. And with the right reforms, Africa really moved to becoming a dynamic economic bloc.
Well, as it stands right now, there's been a 90-day pause put on these tariffs for Africa and some of, the other countries, I believe, excluding China. But looking ahead, Penina, what, integrated policy measures and economic strategies should be prioritized right now to mitigate the immediate impact of these U.S. tariffs?
We should be inward looking. I can't overemphasize how important it is to be inward looking. In the sense that we need to trade intently among ourselves. And when it comes to borrowing, also be able to borrow from our domestic capital markets and to avoid global markets to raise money for domestic consumption. So we need to consider the low-hanging fruits, such as agriculture, which is the often forgotten stepchild with the most essential, if you look at it in terms of food security and the source of employment and income. In the same vein, we also need to develop a robust economic diplomacy machinery to counter some of this negative that we are experiencing at the moment.
Penina, how have past global trade disruptions and external tariff pressures influenced policy reforms in, African nations? What lessons is it that, Namibia and its peers can draw upon to navigate these current challenges?
With regards to past disruptions, we have the 2008 financial crisis to draw lessons from. We also have COVID-19 and how we've seen how that disrupted the supply chain. So our economies are vulnerable if they are heavily reliant on external markets and unprocessed commodity exports. So we must reduce overexposure to volatile external markets. The key lesson is to really have reactive policy shifts that must give way to long-term proactive strategy that prioritize economic sovereignty and innovation and regional integration.
Well, Penina, that's almost all the time that we have. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I think in closing, I'd just like to highlight that adversity handled well is really the best push driving us to embrace our self-reliance and innovation. And as a proud Namibian and a dedicated advocate for Africa's future, I really encourage African countries to align with regional initiatives and implement smart platforms. We can reshape our narrative from being aid dependent to being an equal partner continent. Africa is open for business, and as Pan-Africanists, our future must be shaped by African policies, African voices and African solutions. So let's look at this as a moment to seize and to really journey to economic sovereignty and resilience.
Wonderfully said. Penina, thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you for joining us. Well, when we come back, our conversations here on the Daily Roundup with Nina continues. Do stay with us. We'll be back after this brief break.